The 560th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Got it! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! He got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year, the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you guys on a Saturday afternoon. After Carolina basketball, Hubert Davis, Jim Tanner, they add another player to the roster for the upcoming season. And this one of international flavor, something we've talked about a lot this offseason, and that finally came to fruition for Carolina. We'll tell you who that player is, talk about his game, expectations for him, and the like in just a moment. Before we do that, though, we'll get to the pod thought of the day. We go to Brad Doherty for that pod thought, and that thought is, quote, once you get into that family at North Carolina, you're a part of the future and a part of the past, end quote. This is a pod thought we use a lot around recruiting. Whenever Carolina lands, whether it's a high school commit, a guy out of the transfer portal, or in this case, someone from overseas. And that's what Carolina did earlier this morning, landing Luca Bogavoc from Montenegro, a player out of the Adriatic Basketball Association. And I think this is a really good get for Carolina. And I think this is going to be a guy that the more that you see film and highlights get put on the internet and on the web space, you'll be a lot more, I think, happier with the addition that Carolina made to the roster for the upcoming season. Because I'll be honest with you, some of the reaction to the addition of Luca has kind of caught me off guard. Because I do think this is a better player than what most people might think they're getting right off the bat. You look at what he did last season, averaged nearly 15 points per game, 14.9 points to be exact, with 3.6 rebounds, 2.3 assists, while shooting 45% from the field, 40% from three. He scored a career high, 27 points back at the end of April. 8 of his final 15 games, he scored at least 19 points. He hit 4 threes or more in 6 of his final 13 games. He stands at 6'5", weighs over 200 pounds, and checks off all the boxes in terms of what Hubert Davis was looking to add to the roster for the upcoming season, which was size and shooting. And, we talked about some international guys back a few weeks ago. This was not a name we were talking about then, but it's a name we're talking about now because, at least on the surface, it feels like Carolina's roster for the upcoming season is finally complete.
Yeah, it feels like it, and I think this was what you were hoping for, was a wing that could make some sort of impact for you scoring-wise, and that's what you're getting. You're getting a guy that can shoot the ball incredibly well. Shot 45% from the field overall this year, 39.9% from three, so right at 40%. And then shot the ball well at the foul line as well, 87%. So everything about this kid on paper looks really good. Now, I know a lot of people are probably hesitant because they're saying he's coming from the Adriatic League. How good necessarily is that league? Well, to put it in perspective, this was a guy that playing in this league put up more points and was more impactful than Marcus Page was when he played over in this league. Marcus Page averaged around 8 points a game in this league, and that was when he was a professional at the time. So for a guy that's only 21 years old, I believe there are some people who have said he's 22, but I think he's 21. This is the type of production that you want to see from him. And now he's coming over here. Look, how do you compare it to some of the other guys that Carolina could have gotten in the transfer portal prior to this? He's probably middle of the pack. There's not really anything that you can go off of to tell you that he's better than a guy like RJ Lewis, like Jameer Watkins, guys that stayed in the NBA draft. Not sure, how much he compares with some of the other guys that didn't end up going to the NBA draft that Carolina was pursuing. I would probably still lean Andre Stojakovic over him. I think Stojakovic is definitely a better player than he is. He's shown that he can score at a more consistent rate at the college level. But I do think that this is a really solid addition for this Tar Heel roster. He's not going to be what Drake Powell is going to be. That's the thing that people have to realize. I don't think that all of a sudden now Carolina's ceiling is potentially being a team that makes a run to the Final Four, which is where I think you could have seen them if Drake Powell had ended up returning. But I do think that this is a squad that now feels like they can compete in the ACC, feels like they have the scoring punch at least to be able to compete in the ACC. And that's very important because, before you end up landing this commitment, you're looking at the roster and you're saying there's a glaring hole for Carolina again this year. Last year was that center position. This year it's going to be that wing position. Now this shuts down all that conversation. It's not going to be a glaring concern. Is it going to be a spot that Carolina gets the most production from? Maybe not. We still have to wait and see, but I feel pretty decent about the type of production that you're going to get from the combination of Bogavoc as well as Jonathan Powell.
Yeah, I definitely feel like, if they don't add a wing to this roster going into next year, as optimistic as we typically are, it would be really hard to really think this team would compete to finish, top four in the ACC and then be a team that's solidly in the field. And I want to say this, that's not the standard here. The standard is to compete for conference championships, compete for 1 seeds in the tournament, and compete to be a team that's in the second weekend with a legitimate shot at the Final Four. It's hard, though, to have that expectation going into a year where it's make or break for your head coach. At least that's what the feeling is like from the outside. We don't know internally how much pressure is on Hubert Davis, but we know from the outside looking in, he's got to produce. And production this year would basically be winning enough games and establishing a culture and an identity that we as fans can count on every year moving forward. Because that's the one thing he has struggled to do in his 4 years, is he has struggled to establish an identity of what Carolina basketball is going to be under Hubert. If he can do that this year, then the expectation, the standard of ACC regular season title and, Final Four team, that comes back to the fold in a really big way starting next year. But now you add Luca to this roster and you look at the scoring punch he's going to provide with the size that he's going to provide. And, this roster is deeper than it was a year ago. And I know we've said that it feels like every year here on the pod, but there is actually, I think, legitimate depth for Hubert Davis. There is legitimate size for Hubert Davis, something that did not exist a year ago. And I think there's legitimate lineup versatility because I think you sit here today and he's taking the spot of Drake Powell. That means he's going to play the 3. But, you read some stuff, you hear some other guys talk. He can also be a guy that plays the 2 guard and can slide to that shooting guard position. You have a 6'5" shooting guard. That's going to be very beneficial, I think, more so defensively than it would be offensively, because now you've got size and length to be a difference maker on that end of the court just as much as what he's going to do scoring the basketball. I think you got to like the fact that he showed, major growth and production, 7.8 points per game the year before last. And, of course, that number, almost doubled to over 15 points per game. His shooting was at 42%. That rose to 45%. His three-point shooting was at 32%. That raised to nearly 40%. So that shows you a guy that the more that he's played, the more that he's gotten developed, the better he's become individually as a basketball player. And then I think this is what you really like about the guys that play internationally is, one, they'll already show the pro mindset, but look at all the different competition he's already played in. At 21 years old, as of now, he'll be 22 years old when the season gets started later this November. But he competed in the FIBA Under-20 European Championships of 2022-2023, was a member of the senior FIBA Olympic qualifying team, and for the 2024 Olympics and the 2025 Eurobasket qualifiers. Oh, by the way, because you would see this a lot before you started seeing, big-time scrimmages in the exhibition season, he's played against a college before. He scored 21 points against USC back in 2023. So I think that's what you really have to like about it is, first off, he's older, he's more developed, but I value more of what he's doing in these FIBA events and these Olympic qualifying events, more so than a guy that you could add out of the high school rank that his stuff is grassroots basketball and he's playing on the AAU circuit, but development and stuff isn't the priority. It's mainly winning. It's a lot of one-on-one, whereas when you're playing for your national team, yes, it's about developing and building you up to get you ready to join a team that can compete for a spot in the Olympics. And so I think you're looking at a guy that will show up more developed than any guy you would have for sure gotten out of high school. But how many guys left in the portal would be as developed as he is right now? I think that answer is none. Like with all the big transfers that either stayed in the draft or when they withdrew from the draft, immediately committed to go play college basketball somewhere else, this is as developed a basketball player that Hubert Davis has added to the roster this offseason and any of his previous offseason as Carolina's head coach.
Yeah, that's the thing is that you've got a guy that is going to come in and bring a lot of experience, more so than, you would get if you were getting someone out of the high school ranks. And even with that, you look, who would you have gotten out of the high school ranks that really would have made that much of a difference, especially this late on in the going? You're getting somebody that's not necessarily a high-end contributor. Now you're getting someone out of the international ranks that has experience. You're not building an NBA team. Like, this is the important thing to remember. I saw multiple people bring up the fact, well, he's 21 years of age. Why do we care about that? This is not an NBA team where you're going off of, we're trying to find the guys that have the, most raw talent and everything like that. We're looking for guys that have upside. You're not looking for that. You're looking for someone that can help you win now. And, whether Luca is a guy that stays here 1 year or he stays here 4 years, if he can help you win, then who really cares what age he actually is? The NBA teams, they can worry about that when he ends up entering the NBA draft, and they have to make their decisions on him and whether or not he's worth taking a risk on. So I think this is a pretty perfect pickup for Carolina with where they're at right now. I personally, we were talking about Ivan Karchenkov here recently out of I forget what league he played in, but he was in Germany or originally was from Germany. I mean, you look at him, I would take Luca over him. I think Luca is probably a more polished player just from watching both guys, seeing the way that both guys shoot. That's the other important thing is that how many guys are you finding in the transfer portal now that can shoot the ball the way that Luca shot the ball this past year? There's not many. Like, there aren't a lot of those guys out there. So you're going to settle for a guy that can't necessarily shoot the ball, all because of what? He's coming from the college level. Like, unless he is a plus defender, then there's really nothing that that person would be bringing to the table that Luca isn't going to bring to the table here for Carolina. That's the area that he's going to have to work on the most, is the defensive end of the floor. Definitely a guy that was able to create turnovers. I liked how active he was on the defensive end of the floor from just the short amount of clips that we saw from him on that end. Creates turnovers, but isn't necessarily going to be what Drake Powell was defensively. That's the one thing that you've got to realize if you're a Carolina fan, is you're not going to get somebody of the same caliber of Drake Powell on the defensive end of the floor out of this international group. But I mean, you ended up getting a guy that can score it at all three levels of the floor, a guy that shoots it incredibly well from beyond the arc, which was something that Carolina was looking for this offseason, to get more guys that can shoot the ball well from the outside. I think they've certainly accomplished that, and this is the final piece towards building what it will be a competitive roster in the ACC this year. Like, now you can legitimately go to war and say, hey, if anybody thinks that NC State is going to be better than Carolina, if anybody thinks that Miami is going to be better than Carolina, well, here's the thing. Carolina has no holes now. Some of these other schools, NC State still has a hole at the center position. I don't think that they can trust a guy that's coming over from Africa, who is an unranked prospect. I know, I believe Luca is unranked as well, but I don't think the statistics on Paul Mbaya are nearly as good as what you're going to see from Luca. So I think Carolina did a really good job here. And now what that means is that they are going to be one of those teams in competition to finish top 3 in the ACC. And right now, that's really what we're hoping for. Finish top 3 in the ACC, get comfortably into the NCAA tournament, and then we'll just kind of roll from there. As you said, that shouldn't be the standard of this program, and hopefully it isn't moving forward. But for where Hubert Davis is at right now coming into this season, this is not necessarily the worst place to be for this roster as we sit here right now.
I think you really got to look at the first offseason with the GM, Jim Tanner, in place, with the head coach that, for better or for worse, is not a guaranteed guy to be here next year, and be really impressed with what Carolina did. He's bringing in 9 new players when you combine what he's doing in the transfer portal and the high school recruiting. And let's also say this out loud, because I know there's this narrative that exists that Carolina is broke. All 9 of these players are getting paid. They're being compensated to come to Chapel Hill and play basketball and to perform. When you look at the addition of Luca, this is finally, this was a 5-year plan for Hubert Davis. You go back to his introductory press conference, and he outlined his vision for recruiting. It was, we're going to recruit at the highest level in the United States. And I think when you factor in the fact they've brought in their fair share of McDonald's All-Americans, their fair share of 5-star prospects, you could say they've done that. You look at, we just talked about it yesterday when we talked about 2026 class. Every prospect they've offered in that class is a 5-star prospect. So they are trying to recruit at the highest level here, in the United States. But he talked about wanting to get international and get that talent. And this is something where not having that GM in place hindered him. Well, now you have a GM in place. You're having a front office being installed that can really make that become a reality. So you don't have to do all the legwork in terms of trying to find the guys and then spend the time overseas trying to recruit them, get on Zoom calls at the weird hours because of the time difference and the like. And now that vision has finally come to fruition. And, if you're a Carolina fan that you don't understand it, you better get on board. This isn't just a one-time thing for Carolina. Like, this wasn't Hubert Davis saying, oh, there's no one here in the United States I can go get. There's not a high school prospect. There's not a transfer portal prospect. Well, let's go overseas. No, this is going to be something that Carolina wants to do every single year, because you look at the talent that the international these countries are putting out. We talked about the gap closing when you look at what's happening in these FIBA events. in these World Cup events, let alone when they go to the Olympic stage. And, the United States is not, they're still winning gold, but they're not blowing out opponents like they did for the majority of Olympic competition. You could argue that the best talent in the sport is coming from overseas. It's coming internationally. Well, why would you not want to go get that talent? Especially if you can get that talent when they're 20, 21, maybe 22 years old. They have, yes, 4 years of college eligibility at their disposal, and they're far and away more developed than they ever would have been if they played high school basketball. Like, you're getting the best of both worlds. Is Luca going to be here 4 years? My guess would say probably not. That's a good thing, because if he's not staying here 4 years, this was a guy that thought about entering the draft this past offseason when his season finished up over there in the Adriatic League. That means that he's getting developed to the point where he can turn pro. But this is going to help Carolina so much, as they want to be a program that recruits globally. So this has always been something that, if I ever had a small criticism of Roy Williams, it was I would have loved to gotten into the international scene back in the mid-2010s when Mark Few, Sean Miller, and some other programs were going over there to find guys to bring them here and build their programs around. I'm confident now with Jim Tanner on board as the Carolina GM, no matter who the Carolina basketball head coach is moving forward, they will be a program to reckon with in terms of international recruiting.
Well, to be fair, one of the things, with Roy at the time that is different than where it is now is first of all, NIL was not a thing. So players were not being paid to come over here and play. You got to think that over in those leagues, even at the time, you were getting paid some sort of money. It was smaller sums of money, but you were still getting paid, where you would come to college, not get paid, and there wasn't a guarantee that, of course, you would end up making it to the NBA. Now, I mean, that you're looking at, with the NIL money that you can get, you're going to probably make more money over here through NIL, especially if you end up at one of these bigger schools, than you're going to make over in the Adriatic League. And also, the player pool is much different now than it was back then. Remember that one of the guys that he got involved with and that he did pursue as a international prospect was Lauri Markkanen. And that was one that we all would have jumped on board with. He went to Arizona, but that was one of the few guys that you really looked at and remember coming from from overseas, going to the college level, and then eventually making it to the NBA level. You don't see a lot of guys like that from that era. Now it's a little bit different. You're seeing rosters. I mean, there's an entire roster in the Big Ten that is being built with foreign players. That is exactly what Illinois is. And Illinois is going to be a team that should be in the second weekend of the NCAA tournament this year. But they have gone international. They have become invested in finding guys that might be a little bit older, but fit exactly what they're looking for. And so I think, look, is Luca a surefire to NBA player? I don't think so. Is he a guy that could end up being an NBA player? Is he a guy that's probably in the top 3 to 5 of the international players that have come over this offseason? I would say yes. And that should have you somewhat excited. It shouldn't, again, I don't think you should be pounding your chest and all of a sudden saying, you know what, we're going to go compete with Duke and Louisville at the top of this conference this year. I don't know if the roster is necessarily there yet. But what I do think is that this gives you a roster that is going to allow you to achieve the goals that you want to achieve, or that we have for you as fans. And that's the thing that should comfort you right now. I mean, guys, you can't set the expectations too high for this group, because, yeah, there's so many changes that this crew went through. And you got to give credit to, Jim Tanner and Hubert Davis. We wanted this roster overhauled. We wanted this roster to look different, because last year was simply not good enough. Well, they have almost completely overhauled this entire roster. There are not many guys that are coming back. And so now you're going to be looking at a completely different team, a team that's built with a lot more size, something that Hubert Davis, when he first came here, that wasn't going to be his philosophy. his philosophy was to go smaller. He wanted to play smaller, but he's learned, and that's one thing that you can give him credit for. He has learned that you need to have a bigger roster to be able to succeed, especially in the ACC, and especially with where college basketball is at right now, where big men have started to become a very important part of the game once again. I mean, you saw it a couple of years ago, 2 big men, 2 foreign big men at that. Now, Zach Edey, of course, is from Canada, but still foreign prospect. Those 2 guys went head-to-head for a national championship, him and Donovan Clingan. You can get there with size like that on your roster. And so that's what Carolina went out and did. Luca isn't necessarily the biggest player that you'll see at that wing spot, but I do think that this is a really nice addition that people should be getting behind. And honestly, if you're complaining, nothing is going to satisfy you. Like, I don't really know who else they could have gone out and gotten, especially at this point, it would have been able to satisfy people. Jameer Watkins stayed in the draft, guys. He's not an option. RJ Lewis, not an option. So with those guys off the board, and with Carolina, having missed on a guy like Stojakovic, which, I mean, when it came to his recruitment, it was kind of just all over the place. I mean, I think this is a great job, a great plan B for them, and ends up actually working out pretty well, and will give Carolina a chance to compete in the ACC this year.
Well, there's absolutely no doubt. And for the guys that are complaining, I mean, these are just, we talked about it, I think 2 weeks ago, whenever we last recorded a podcast. The anti-Hubert crowd is real. They're loud. And I don't know what he has to do for them to go away, for him to be quieted, for them to be shut up. But, for those guys, Hubert has their work cut out for them. I do think, though, he's put together a roster that when we're looking up at that first matchup against Duke in February or whatever, I think they'll be plowed. They'll be pleased with where the team is at and in the direction that the program is heading. So now let's do the fun thing that we do whenever we land a player, portal prospect, high school recruit, whatever, and that's project. Because you said that you would rather have Luca over a guy like Ivan Karchenkov, someone we talked about pretty extensively a little over a month ago, when I was on my way home from a family event I was at. I told you over the phone, I think there's a chance he leads Carolina in scoring. If I'm saying that, then that should tell you how I've only spent about an hour watching film, doing some deep research on him. I was the bad guy at a family event on my phone watching tape of an international basketball prospect. But when you host a podcast and write a blog, you got to do what you got to do. But you see the scoring potential. I think he's going to be absolutely lethal in transition. I think he will be a transition shooter that, quite frankly, outside of RJ Davis, we have not had, under Hubert Davis's watch, where I think he'll be a guy that if he grabs a rebound, he's a one-man fast break. And yes, he'll stop at the 3-point line. But if he's shooting 40% from 3, we're not going to complain about that shot selection. He has an ability to get to the rim. I think he'll get there. It'll be a little bit tougher in college because the floor space is more condensed than it is in the even international, where their lane is different. The spacing overseas is a little bit different. But I think at 6'5", he'll be able to get there and shoot over defenders and score as well. But if I'm saying that about him, I think that should tell you how I feel about him, because if you're new to the show, new to the program, I'm absolutely in love with Kyan Evans. I think Kyan Evans is going to be an all-ACC caliber player. I think he's going to be a fringe All-American candidate. I think that kid coming over from Colorado State is poised to be one of the breakout stars on the national scene for college basketball this upcoming year. But I do think there's a world where Luca is Carolina's leading scorer, averaging 15, 16, 17 points per game in the ACC. What do you think about projection-wise for him, expectations for him, and what do you think that production looks like his first season in collegiate basketball playing for Hubert Davis?
I would say that leading scorer might be a little bit too much. I would probably see him as, a guy that could finish second on the team in scoring, more towards that third range, because I just think that Kyan Evans is going to be the primary ball handler. He's the guy that Carolina is counting on to score the basketball. And you can't forget about Caleb Wilson, man. I know he's a 5-star prospect coming out of high school, and I know that some people will say, well, look at the lack of success that we've had with 5 stars here over the last few years. Guys, he's going to get his opportunity to play and play a lot this year. There's a very good chance that when Carolina starts the season, he will be the starter for Carolina at that 4 spot, even over a guy like Jaren Stevenson, who brings a little bit of experience to that position. I think those are the 2 guys that you're counting on to sort of lead you in scoring. And I think, if Luca can be that third scorer for you, sort of that Cormac Ryan type of player, then I think that's what you're kind of hoping that you're going to get. That's what I would envision Luca being this year, is that Cormac Ryan type player, a guy that can knock down shots from the outside. Cormac, not necessarily great at doing that in his 1 year with Carolina, not as good as some of his previous stops, mainly at Notre Dame, but still a guy that I think, what had that experience, was a really good leader for Carolina. That's one thing I think you're going to see from Luca, is that he's going to be a really good leader. I'm interested to see how the language barrier sort of works. Is he a guy that knows how to speak good at English? Because if he does, then he could certainly be a guy that's a leader in this group. He could certainly be someone that stands out because he's 21 years old. He's been doing this. He's played with other professionals for 2 or 3 years now. And so I think that there are some decent expectations for him, and you should have some decent expectations for him. But I would not put this guy because he averaged, 15 points a game in a professional league. I would not say that this has to be your leading scorer. I think some people are going to look at that and say, well, since he's a professional, since he's 21 years of age, he should be able to do that. But when I see guys like Kyan Evans and the way he played late last year at Colorado State, and Caleb Wilson, the type of prospect that he is coming out of high school, I expect those guys to be your leading scorers, and for Luca to be that third option that Carolina has to score the ball.
Yeah, I don't think it's my expectation, but I do think there is a realistic world where he is Carolina's top scorer. What this roster has right now on paper, and you got to see how it all comes together, I think there's a nice balance of scoring that exists in that starting 5. Like, I think you can look at Evans, Luca, and Caleb Wilson and expect them all to average double-digit points per game. And I believe that Seth Trimble is a guy, no RJ Davis. If he takes that next step as an offensive player, really is becoming a much more consistent shooter, because he showed last year Trimble can get to the rim whenever he wants to. I think Trimble could be a guy that's averaging double-figure scoring, and then who knows what the 5 position holds with the way Carolina's going to rotate their trio of bigs. But that's something that they did not have last year. There was not a lot of balanced scoring on Carolina's roster. It was really dependent on what RJ Davis was doing and the guys playing around him. 2 years ago, though, when you had RJ and you had Harrison Ingram and you had Armando Bacot all scoring the way they were scoring, look how explosive, look how efficient Carolina's offense was, and look at the results. 17-3 mark in ACC play, 29 wins overall, a 1 seed in the tournament, made the Sweet 16. Like, you need to have scoring diversity on your roster. The team that just won the national championship had that in Florida. They had a multiple different guys that could take over at any point in the game. I'm not comparing Carolina to Florida, but, that's the team that's won the national championship, having 4 to 5 scoring options at their disposal. The last question we have to talk about before we get out of here is this feels like Carolina's done. I know there's been some intel from the guys over at Inside Carolina that have done a great job, while it's been very quiet, just providing as much information as they could for us possibly, that Hubert Davis was looking to add 1 to 2 more guys to the roster for the upcoming season. With them getting, I think, such a solidified player in Luca, I don't see them if they take on another player, it would be strictly an upside guy, a developmental piece that they're just taking to the roster because they want to fill the roster out. If it was flip-flop and they landed the upside guy first, then I do think Hubert Davis, Jim Tanner would still be aggressively pursuing another player to add to the roster next season. I'm not of the opinion that Van Allen Lubin is going to be on this roster next year. Whether that house settlement comes down, on Monday, I still think with just how that kind of transpired, I think Carolina has all but moved on from him, and he's got to find his next basketball home wherever that ends up being. Are you in agreement with that, or do you think there's still a scenario where we're back on here in a week or two talking about the final then addition to Carolina's roster, 2025, 2026?
I think they're done. I said it today when we were talking about it. I just don't see anybody else that they're really pursuing. We haven't heard any other names. I don't think Korchenkov is going to be a take now because you got Luca in here. And I don't think they need anybody else there. You've got Jonathan Powell, who's got the length, who can play there. If you need, or if you want to put certain lineups out there, you could either put Jaren Stevenson or Caleb Wilson at that 3 spot and let those guys go to work with an incredibly big lineup. So with those guys, I think you're feeling pretty good. You also can employ the 3-guard lineup at times, which I think you will still see at times this year. So those areas I think are all in a really good spot. The one area that I would look at and say, if I think that they are going to go out and get anybody else, would be a backup big man, a guy that has a little bit of experience, because you don't necessarily have a lot of experience with Zayden High. You have very similar type of experience with James Brown, guys that played in garbage time, never have really played a significant role. Now, Zayden High is a guy that, is probably going to play more of that 4 spot. So you're really looking at Henry Visar to play most of the time at that center position. And then you're looking for James Brown to be the guy that sort of spells him off the bench. To me, I would feel maybe a little bit more comfortable if Carolina went out, got someone with a little bit more experience. I know one guy that they were looking at one point was Ante Brevic, the center from the College of Charleston. Now he might be, I don't even know if he's still available out there. If he is, he might be a guy that, is looking for a spot where he can actually start and play some significant minutes. So maybe that's not quite the fit, but that would be the one area that I think Carolina would still possibly be looking for somebody. But I think they probably believe in James Brown, the leap that he can end up taking this year. And I don't necessarily think that's the worst thing either, because I do think that there is a chance that he can grow this year, especially with, more of a role for him this year than he had last year. I think that could motivate him to really work hard this offseason. So personally, I'm thinking they're done. But we'll have to just wait and see.
Well, no matter what happens, we'll be here covering it. We'll be here talking about it. 9 new players feels like enough. You added 5 transfers, an international prospect, and then 3 incoming freshmen from the high school ranks, combined with what you're bringing back, with Seth Trimble and some of the other guys. It feels like this roster's in a really good spot. I think it's in a better spot than maybe I even thought it was going to be once you lost a Powell to the NBA. Van Allen Lubin kind of decided to, he wanted to make more money than what he was getting paid for what he did last year. So I think you've got to give Hubert credit. This is why the addition of Jim Tanner, I think, was huge, because I don't think this roster would be where it is without him. And the staff's a lot of credit too, because we know how much they're working to, get this program back to where we expect it to be on an annual basis. Because if you think we're frustrated with where Carolina basketball is at, I can assure you that coaching staff is as well, because they know what's expected of them, and they know that they have not lived up to that expectation every year since they took over back at the end of the Roy Williams era. That's going to wrap up this edition of the podcast, guys. In the meantime, we're going to direct you guys to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Go and read about Luca if you want to. Anthony got that article up for us earlier this afternoon. You can go and check that out. We had some stuff earlier in this week as well about Carolina's ACC basketball opponents and their home and home with Georgetown being finalized. So it was a pretty big basketball week on the website as well. Go and get all that coverage. Carolina football, big recruiting weekend for Bill Belichick. Got off to a bad start. One of their top commitments in the 2026 class decommitted last night. Anthony had you covered with that as it happened. Also did a podcast on it as well. Go and check out the Heel Tough Blog podcast where he spoke about that. But we'll have you covered with all the news and notes coming out of the weekend of recruiting for Carolina football. And before you know it, we'll be doing, a bunch of position previews and the offseason stuff because fall camp is just about a little under 2 months away. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. Simply search the Four Corners Podcast and we'll pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the remainder of the basketball off season. With that, guys, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. Do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.